All right, thank you, Tom, for no further ado. Guys, it's 4:07 or something, so if you're sitting in the back of the room, come up to the front of the room so you can add to the energy. This is the first time I've given this presentation. I'm really poorly prepared, and so I kind of took Sarah and Tom's mission to heart, which is I built a presentation that really is going to need some input and some ideas from you. So if you're willing to come up, I'm not going to cold call on anybody other than maybe David Chang or Jim Daniel over here. I won't embarrass you, but I kind of want to just share a couple slides, a little bit of thinking about a way to position Boston in 2016 that I think we have some really good momentum on. We can probably use a little more momentum, and that's kind of where I want to get input from you. So as Tom mentioned, I've been doing this column for the Boston Globe since 2000. Before that, helped start Boston.com and the digital publishing division at the Globe. More recently, I've been involved with Innovation Leader, which is a website and magazine that I help run, which looks at kind of innovation in big companies and labs and corporate venture capital and accelerators and sort of how does the Global 1000 think about innovation. So my first slide is this is a sales pitch. I want to present you. I'm not trying to sell you something, but this is a sales pitch that I put together for today. That I want you to imagine we're talking to a CEO of a company in Belgium or in Minneapolis or in Buenos Aires about why they need a presence in Boston. And I like this phrase. It's kind of, I've been using it and bouncing it around and socializing it for a couple of years. I like to say that Boston's the place where the future happens first. And we have this amazing heritage of making the future happen in a lot of really interesting fields. I mean, Alexander Graham Bell was a professor at Boston University in the 19th century when he invented this awesome technology called the telephone. So you could have been the first, among the first people to make a telephone call if you were living in Boston back then, or have a telephone connected to your house or to your business. And we didn't stop there. Many of you know Rich Miner was co-founder of this startup company called Android that Google acquired, led them into the mobile OS business. Also Nuance, which is here in the Boston area in Burlington, Bedford? Burlington. They have a Cambridge Central Square office, developed the original speech recognition technology for Siri. It was the place where instant photography happened first. And if you start with Edwin Land and you go all the way to Instagram, you sort of see that this was the place where the technology was born to sort of let you look at an image the minute you create it and also share it around, right? You remember sort of the Polaroid social experience of everybody wanted to see the pictures as soon as they came out of the camera while they were still warm. Boston was the place where we had entrepreneurs and technologists who said, black and white movies are really great, but we should start making movies in color. And they started this company called Technicolor, without which we wouldn't have had this movie, Flowers and Trees, which was Walt Disney's first Oscar-winning movie in 1932. We wouldn't have had Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz and a movie industry that was in color. I love this slide because Boston was also the place where we had these university professors like Ivan Sutherland and these MIT nerds. I think this is Sandy Pentland on the left here. Who were really interested in virtual reality and augmented reality before we kind of had those terms. This is a demo that Ivan Sutherland set up at Harvard that was called the Sword of Damocles demo because it was so heavy that it sort of had to have this counterbalance so that it didn't crush your spine when you put it on. But augmented reality, eventually we realized from the 60s and the 90s that to sell augmented reality and virtual reality, you have to have super hot models instead of super nerdy computer scientists. Boston's been the place where we created the first video game. We still have great video game companies like Harmonix pushing that genre forward. And also, I saw Ty from Amazon Robotics. This is the place where we realized that there was going to be lots of robots in consumer homes and also lots of robots in small businesses, as Rethink believes, and lots of robots in warehouses. So this is, I think, a key part of our pitch, is that Boston's position right here at this intersection of academic research, big companies that can commercialize technology, and startups that are often developing the first proof of concept or the first barely commercial version of a technology. We can share lots of data, which I don't want to do, about all the things that make Massachusetts and Boston unique. I was looking at this in the wake of the election last week, but Massachusetts has a higher percentage of residents with advanced degrees than any other state. The District of Columbia beats us by virtue of being a really small kind of non-state, but of all the real states, we're number one. We've been winning this Milken Institute Science and Technology Index Award since 2002. And you can see we're actually doing great. I think this is probably due to everybody in this room. The number of patents compared to the average in the US has actually been going up over the last 5 or 6 years, which is awesome. This is a quiz. The answer is not complicated. This is a list of universities whose professors or alumni have gone on to win the Nobel Prize, the Fields Prize in Mathematics, or the Turing Prize in Computer Science. There's only one state that has 3 universities on this top 10 list. And sorry, Connecticut, it's not you. I created this map, which, man, it's not looking that great with this high brightness projector, but take my word for it. If you go to this bit.ly link, I've created a Google map of about 50 places in Boston where you have either a big company that's put an innovation outpost here, like the CVS Health Digital Innovation Lab, which is in the Back Bay, or Shell TechWorks over in Cambridge near MIT. But I also listed some of the places you could go, like the Pulse at Mass Challenge space that's over in the Fenway, where you have kind of big companies and startups in some sort of interaction. Greentown Labs is another good example where you have lots of the big energy companies hanging out with startups, putting on events for startups. So if you share that URL, this is a map of, I think I'm close to about 50 sites in Boston, which really surprised me. And some of them are really new. This one I put up here, the Target's Food in the Future Lab, which is right near the Kendall Square Marriott. Most people don't know that this is here. It just opened last year. It's Target kind of thinking through what is the future of our grocery business in partnership with MIT, with IDEO, with lots of entrepreneurs. And they're doing things like building scanners that can detect the freshness of that strawberry. It may look like a fresh strawberry, but it may actually taste terrible. And so they're thinking about what are the technologies we're going to use to ensure that the food you buy, the information about it is available, it's really transparent, and that it tastes the way you want it to taste. So just the last couple of slides. I think when I go out to Silicon Valley, when I read the way that Silicon Valley folks write about big companies, they're often mocked for setting up some kind of outpost or lab in Silicon Valley. It's like, you want to be here with the cool kids, and so you've put 10 Ford executives in Palo Alto to look over and see what Tesla's doing and try to figure out how to be as innovative as Tesla. I don't think we do that. I think Boston actually has this really great vibe of welcoming big companies and saying, yeah, come here and sponsor some research at Harvard or sponsor some research at Tufts, connect with startups. So I think we really need to be selling this a little bit better. I started a list just because I really like to work ahead of time. I started a list yesterday for this presentation, which is at this bit.ly link, bit.ly/how-to-plug-in. And I've been asking people to add to the list, and it has sort of 2 components. One of them is ways that if you were this big company CEO that we've been talking about, ways that you could connect with startups in Boston, or ways that you could connect with academic institutions in Boston. And it's already got 20, 25 things on the list, but there's my call for action of help me build this list, share this link. It's just a Google Doc that anyone can contribute to. I think this is at the center of the pitch, is that Boston is the place where entrepreneurs, academic researchers, and Global 1000 companies come together to solve hard problems and build the future. I think this is not just a positioning statement. This is something that we actually do, and you can point to lots of great examples. And so here's where I kind of want to start to get your input, is I think we should think about these 4 issues. Who are the human APIs if you're the food industry CEO from Buenos Aires, and you want to understand who's the person I call or email in Boston to sort of give me that tour and take me around and show me how to plug in. Who are these people? Are they at the City of Boston? Are they at the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce? Are they at the Massachusetts Economic Development Office? Are they in this room? I don't think those people are visible enough yet. 2 is just the marketing question of how do we spread this message. 3 is who is going to collect the impact stories of what these big companies are doing here. I mean, Kiva and Amazon already have a pretty great impact story of, hey, we acquired a startup, we've built on that startup, it's now a technology that's in every Amazon distribution center, and we're continuing to play with startups and academic researchers to get better and better. So I think, where is the collection of impact stories of what Amazon, Target, Shell, all these great companies have been doing in Boston? And finally, connecting the companies with each other to share best practices and help them understand, yes, we put $500,000 into this research initiative and felt it was really well spent, but this other research initiative, we felt like they flushed it down the toilet. And so sort of helping that information exchange happen, helping them understand what organizations to sponsor, what co-working spaces to be present at. I think that's, to me, these are 4 areas we can do better. And so this is where I kind of would like to hear you. Do you have ideas on other things we should be doing better? Do you have ideas on how do we spread this message? Or do you want to help contribute to the list of, here's how you can plug in, or maybe you sort of saw this map on this page, which got a little bit washed out, and there are places that, when you look at this map online, be interested that, that I don't have on there. But hopefully, Christine, am I within my time frame here? We have a couple minutes.
Oh, yeah.
If people still have energy at this point in the afternoon to ask questions or comment, yeah, go ahead, Robert.
I'd like to add one thing to your list of questions that things we need to work on.
Yeah.
One of our great assets are the number of brilliant people from all around the world who flow through Boston every year, and every year, 92% of them, I know the numbers, but it's huge, leave.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, through many of the things on that map, things that will keep people in Boston. But I think there's a lot more that needs to be done.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. And MassTLC was involved with this NewCo festival this year. And I think almost 100% of the places you could visit at NewCo were kind of startups or growth companies and not necessarily these bigger companies. So I like that idea of how do we expose students and give them access to go to the Target Food in the Future Center, or to go to Shell TechWorks, or to go to, these places. Yeah, go ahead, Jim. I didn't even have to cold call him. He's willing to volunteer.
I love it. I love the energy, too. Again, I talked to John Patel the opening night, and I asked him, I said, what is NewCo here compared to other places? What's the vibe for you? And he said, I got to tell you something. You guys are over the top in terms of density and collisions and multidimensionality. So that's really fantastic. The part I was going to ask you about is, on the selling side, there's some other intangibles about where we are on an agenda that's a humanistic, sustainable agenda, whether it's gay rights, whether it's healthcare for all. These are things that we've led the nation on.
Yeah.
Which I think are really strong selling points. And the dark side also, as we've also heard in some of these other Mass Technology Leadership Council things, we haven't really addressed inequality and some of the other diversity issues outside of the greater Boston area. We still have work to be done, but could we make an agenda to make this really is the shining city on the hill for everybody?
I think it's a really good point. And yeah, not just this, so to focus our energy and to focus these kinds of companies on the income inequality issues, but also what we've done in terms of healthcare coverage for all and marriage equality and all those sort of social dimensions.
Well,
you're
we're
saying?
really good at making robots. Are we really good at retraining?
Yeah.
Are we going to set the world standard in retraining?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the other dimension too is there's a lot of great organizations in Massachusetts that think about global application of technologies and how do you take a great solar cell that's developed at Greentown Labs and actually deploy it, in Africa and kind of get that global development thing happening, which I do think is probably an agenda item for a lot of these Fortune 500 companies, is spreading ideas and spreading technology outside of the really developed world.
You just remind me, Scott, I'm not from around here, for those who don't know me, in case you hadn't figured that out. You just reminded me of something that used to be right in the forefront of my mind when I was living in New Zealand and alternating between going to Silicon Valley and going to Boston, and particularly in those days when more of the tech was out by 128, but it's still true. I think one of the huge differences is if you're in the valley, because of its physical geography, you can see all the companies. You can see the signs. You can literally, as you drive down El Camino Real or 101 or 280 or any of the cross parkways, you see this company sign, this company sign, this company sign, this company sign. Here, they're hidden behind trees or inside buildings. So in the physical sense, they're almost completely fucking invisible.
Yeah.
You stand in the seapoint and you look around and you go, well, a lot of office blocks, they're probably insurance companies.
I know.
What do you mean mass challenges?
Or right across the street here, we all know this is Fidelity Investments World Headquarters, but there's no sign on the building that says Fidelity Investments World Headquarters.
Nor is there about Fidelity Labs, which is across the street,
right,
or State Street's Labs, or any of the labs. So I just still find it from a physical, as you walk around or drive around this environment, it is completely physically invisible, and it is so obvious and so in your face in the valley. Doing something about that, like going and twisting Marty's arm up behind his back and saying, can we put freaking great signs on outside all of the buildings so people actually know what's going on here?
Yeah. It's a,
That would be so non-Bostonian though.
Oh, whoa, sorry, you have a great country, you know? We'd like Boston to be more like that, rather than sort of covering it in signs. Can't agree with you.
Andy, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I just had, because I see you become something of an expert on these corporate innovation departments. My question is very vague, but what are big companies trying to get out of their interaction with startups, and how do they absorb it? And you see a lot of these innovation departments, it seems like they don't absorb very well. So what's really working in that cycle?
I mean, like, well, one thing that's working is like the ones that will have the patience to keep it going on for 5 or 10 years. I mean, you think about like Lego's collaboration with the MIT Media Lab, which has gone on long enough that it really does inform the way Lego thinks about all of its toys that have technology and computing in them. But you know, that's because they've been committed for 10 plus years to that relationship. But I think a lot of what they're looking for is like exposure to new ideas. It's a place for their executives to get out of the building and be in a different milieu. In some cases, it's going to be partnerships and collaborations where it's like, well, we see you have something that our customers might be interested in or our engineers might be interested in integrating. So I think it's all those things. It's probably some more that I'm not thinking of right now. I mean, sometimes it may be that they have a corporate venture capital arm, like Samsung Ventures has a person in Cambridge, and they're going to actually make some investments or potentially make some acquisitions. And yeah, sometimes, you know, if you think about Microsoft having such a presence in Cambridge, which they really didn't 10 years ago, there's just a lot of different community interaction with Microsoft than we had before they had set up Microsoft Nerd in Kendall Square and like made it this meeting place that we all go to, you know, 4, 5, 6 times a year. Yeah, Scott.
So I think when we're thinking about bringing other corporations here or keeping students, retaining them, I think there's a hierarchy of needs that both of those prototypes need to see within an environment in order to say, yes, let's go there. And I think for students specifically, they ask themselves this question, can I be successful in Boston? Like, can I foresee myself being successful? And there's some very fundamental things that we can fix to help answer that question. And some of it's about affordable housing. You know, can I see myself with an early career salary, living in the city where it's hip and it's fun and accessible to my friends? And then also access to great transportation, right? The city feels very much like an old city. And people who go to school here recognize the decay of the infrastructure. And if I ride the T, I recognize it's hard to get to work or it's hard to get to school. When I go to London, it still feels very much like an old city, but when I get on the tube, it feels very much like a modern city. And I feel that in order for us to be competitive and to bring great corporations and to keep students, a focus on infrastructure over the next 10 years is critical. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we're better than a lot of cities where they don't have any trains, you know? So like if you compare it to like, I don't know, I haven't been to Minneapolis recently, but I don't remember there being a subway there the last time I was there. And so there are a lot of cities where everybody just, there's no other choice but driving. So I think we're better than that, but I totally agree, you know, if
Look at the valley.
yeah.
So messed up.
Silicon Valley, yeah, it doesn't have public transport. You know, it at least has Caltrain, you know, it has BART. You can sort of use those to get to some places. But I completely agree is like, you know, young people do want to be using public transit and maybe Uber or Zipcar to supplement that every once in a while. And so I think it is a big part of our selling proposition. And if you could see this map a little bit better, I mean, you know, I don't know, I don't think it's my brightness that I can turn down. Yeah, that's not affecting it. But you know, all this stuff is clustered along T lines. You know, it's clustered at Kendall Square and you know, around here in the Seaport District where you're sort of on the Silver Line and it's in the Back Bay. And so I agree with you 100%. David.
Sorry, I just wanted to add on to Scott's point. One of the big things we haven't really talked too much about is the role of academic institutions. And I spend a lot of time now with students where they don't realize all of the good stuff that's just right here. And so you end up having kids come in from like all different parts of the world, and their assumption to do an early stage company is to go somewhere where there's some sort of like perception that there's an advantage over there. And it's not that they're tied to it, it's just like, oh, I didn't know that these other things were there. And so some of the small things we're doing to try to just encourage more of that interaction is with students that are interested in a particular field, just connecting them with those clusters of excellence that are here. And so we had a lunchtime discussion with Ty and team on robotics, right? And it's such an easy way to get someone just kind of looped in, and all it takes is like a handful of interactions for them to really get kind of set roots down. So there are absolutely things that we can do from like the student side to keep people in Boston longer.
Yeah. I also feel, and tell me if you disagree, David, that like every school is solving things for themselves, you know, like whether it's HBS, which you're affiliated with, or it's somebody at BU or somebody at Wentworth Institute, like everybody's solving the problem of how do we get entrepreneurs to campus, or how do we get our students to maybe visit companies or visit these big company labs. And I just wish there was more sort of collective action where you had every school saying like, hey, what if we got together and threw one big startup fair, or, you know, or did one big startup open house day or lab visit day, as opposed to every school sort of fighting the same exact battle of, you know, how do we get entrepreneurs to campus and how do we get our students out to see cool stuff.
Yeah, and on that topic, because academics, or at least institutions, have very different assets from corporates. Like if you look at a shared mentor base, like they're all trying to build up a mentor pool. The mentor pools largely overlap. It's the same people, so there's absolutely no reason why they have to be different ones. And some of the ways that corporates can collaborate with institutions are ones where a very concrete example on the incubator one was, as a company, you tend to have assets like physical assets. You have a lot of smart people in industry, and at schools, you tend to have content and education, and those work really well together. And I think there was a morning session here that talked a little bit about how the landscape is changing, where some institutions are now reaching out to large companies to provide some of that education. That I think there's some really powerful things that you can do there. And then I guess one last kind of final point about this is, I recently had to go out to France where I had to do a talk on entrepreneurship, and what amazed me was that like when we are in Boston, we kind of think, oh, there's all this other stuff that's like bigger than us. We're you know, second tier in some sense. When you step outside of this, it is a completely different thing. When they view this part of the world, it is such a magnet for people to come here that, you know, that's kind of 90% of the battle, right? Just getting someone interested in coming. And so we can work on that last 10% to just keep them here.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I guess, you know, if you look at this, where this list is today and the academic part of it, it's like 100 things at MIT that big companies can plug into. And I feel like the rest of the universities maybe should look at MIT as a model in terms of just different ways for companies to interface. And like, you know, they can go to the ILP, the Industrial Liaison Program at MIT to sort of get visibility into all the different labs. And do you have that same thing at Tufts, or do you have that at BU? You know, those same kind of, you know, human APIs or guides that can help you figure out what's going on. Let's see, does anybody else have a first question? And then, yeah, sorry. Oh, Michael already has the microphone. No, go ahead.
Oh, I'll keep it quick. It's, agree 100% with everything you're saying. Throw it back at you. What institutionally would be the next step? Because I'll buy your implicit thesis that there's not an organization or an entity which plays the sort of catalytic role to go do this. There's a lot of organizations around, but they each have their own specific niche. What would you take as the next big step forward?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it does feel like it's a natural thing for the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, or, you know, the Jay Ash at the Housing and Economic Development Council, agency, whatever that's called, to do. And I don't know, do you disagree, Tom, that like one of those groups seems like this would be part of their pitch? But I guess they all just kind of get distracted by like a million different industries and a million different messages and companies like GE that are shopping around for new headquarters. And so like I'm not sure they think along these lines of like what could be a great marketing message for a certain population of people.
Yeah, it's something that we're definitely very interested in. I'll say a few years back, John Harthorne, Tim Rowe, and I sat down to look at doing one of these welcome, if you think of it as like a campus visitation day, when all these delegations come, because we all get them.
Yeah.
And it's sort of our civic obligation to take them and show them around and whatnot, but they're not really core of what we do. It didn't really materialize. We hired someone for a little while, but it had to fund itself. And so there's some challenges here. I do think, if Jay Ash or someone wanted to fund something like that, a person, there's a willingness amongst all the organizations to contribute and give the keys to the centers and the codes to the events and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a challenging problem to address, because I feel like I sometimes hear about, like, the week before you'll hear, like, oh, there's a group from Portugal that's going to be in Boston next week. Who should they go visit? And it's hard to know how you tune into all those different, groups. Do we have time for one more question, Christine?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's important to address, particularly for students that have the dialogue, that they can be entrepreneurial, but they don't necessarily have to be a founder. And it's because sometimes, some students coming out may be better served by being a number 3 employee, number 4 employee, in the first 10 people, but there's not really that encouragement because there's so much emphasis on being a founder. So what, and I mean, I founded my company and it worked out for me, but I don't think it's the right thing for anyone. And I've seen my peers, fail to raise funding and then just move to the West Coast and get a job,
Yeah.
working in Silicon Valley. So.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. The thing I would add to that, and then I'll stop talking, is, is like, if you think about the Boston, the companies that are founded here and are, Massachusetts founded and grown companies like Fidelity or Staples or Akamai, like, you can get to maybe 10 of them that feel like they're household names, Converse, Reebok. And then after 10, like, you really start TripAdvisor, then you really start having to struggle for it. I think one thing that makes this worth highlighting to me is that those recent grads, if they're not kind of startup people and they want to go work for a big company, rather than saying, like, oh, lots of the Fortune 500's in New York, or, I'll go to Chicago or I'll go to LA, like, these are all really recognizable brand names that they could go work for without leaving Boston. And they could say to their parents, you can't see all the labels here, but to say to your parents, like, or your friends, I'm going to work for Apple in Kendall Square, or Facebook in Kendall Square, is like a known quantity without losing them to Silicon Valley, because they feel like that's where you have to go to work for, like, a, cool name brand tech company. It certainly helps that we have, the Amazon office locally, and you have this Toyota Research Institute that's working on advanced and self-driving cars. So I really like your point. I feel like, there is that spectrum of students. Like, some will start a company, some want to be an early employee, but some want to work for, like, a more stable, recognizable company. Anyway, thank you. Greg, I'll deal with you later. But thank you for listening and for all the great comments, and thanks to Tom and Sarah and Christine, everybody, for inviting me.